Hello, boys and girls. Today we're going to read a biography. And this part of the word bio means life. And graph means write. So a biography is a story written about someone's life. And it is a nonfiction, not fake story, a real story written about someone's life by another person. If you write it yourself, it's called an autobiography. But today's biography is Helen Keller, and it was written by Jane Sutcliffe, and the illustrations are by Robert Papp. So we're going to read a biography about Helen Keller today, and I bet you've heard of her before. Helen Keller. Jane Sutcliffe. The library was Jane Sutcliffe's favorite place to visit when she was a kid. She says she loves reading biographies just to get a peek at how other people live day to day in different times and places. Now she writes biographies, and the illustrator is Robert Papp. Most of Robert Papp's clothes are covered in oil paint. That's because he's extremely messy when he paints. Mr. Papp lives in Pennsylvania with his wife Lisa, who is also an artist. She's not quite as messy as he is, though. So we're going to read about Helen Keller. How many of y'all have heard of her? This is Tuscumbia, Alabama, 1886. Helen Keller reached out. She touched warm, coarse hair. Her busy fingers moved farther down. They felt something smooth and wet. Slap! A hairy tail smacked into Helen's face. Helen could not see her family's milking cow, but she liked touching it. Helen Keller had been blind and deaf for most of her life. The only way she knew the world was by touch, taste, and smell. Helen was born in 1880 in Tuscumbia, Alabama. When she was just a baby, she became very sick. The illness took away her sight and hearing. Helen could not hear her brother's laughter or her mother's voice. She could not see her father's smile or the pretty flowers outside her window. For Helen, there was only silence and gray darkness. So what was it that made Helen lose her sight and her hearing? It was an illness. She got sick as a baby, didn't she? There are different reasons that you can lose your sight and hearing. To learn to speak, children need to hear words, but Helen could not hear anything, so she could not speak. Instead, she made motions. When she wanted her mother, she put her hand against her face. When she wanted her father, she put the motion of putting on a pair of sunglasses. When she was hungry, she pretended to slice and butter bread. So what do you think that means? She's probably wanting her mama, isn't she, right there? And there's an actual picture of her. Helen Keller knew she was different from the rest of her family. They moved their lips when they wanted things. Sometimes Helen stood between two people as they talked. She held her hands to their lips. Then she tried moving her own lips, but still no one understood her. That made Helen angry. Sometimes she screamed and cried and kicked for hours. She threw things and hit people, but it didn't change anything. She was still alone in silence and darkness. I think about how we would feel if we couldn't see or we couldn't hear and we couldn't communicate. That would probably make us feel pretty angry too, wouldn't it? Helen was hard to control. Her parents didn't know how to help her. They took her to doctors. None of the doctors could help Helen see or hear again. When Helen was 6, a doctor suggested the Kellers visit Alexander Graham Bell. Dr. Bell was famous for inventing the telephone, but he also taught deaf people, and there is Alexander Graham Bell. So do you think her family loved her? I think so, because they take her to all these different places and all these different people to try to get her help, don't they? Dr. Bell told the Kellers to write Michael Anagnos in Boston. I hope I said his name right. Mr. Anagnos was the head of the Perkins Institution for the Blind. He believed Helen could learn how to let out the thoughts locked inside her. Mr. Anagnos promised to send Helen a teacher, and there he is, Michael Anagnos. Helen and teacher, March 1887. So what do you think this section's going to be about? This first section was about what? Tuscumbia, Alabama, 1886, when she was a little girl growing up, wasn't it? And now this is going to be about Helen and her teacher. Helen's teacher came to live with the Kellers that spring. Her name was Annie Sullivan. Annie had studied at the Perkins School. She was nearly blind herself. Annie needed to control Helen's wild behavior so she could teach her. But Helen did not understand that Annie wanted to help her. For 2 weeks, Helen fought with Annie. She hit Annie and knocked out one of her front teeth. She even locked Annie in an upstairs room. Mr. Keller had to get a ladder and let Annie out through the window. And right there's Annie Sullivan. Do you think that was a hard job? Do you think she had a hard job? Yeah. Do you think Annie Sullivan cared about Helen? Well, yeah. If she went through all that and still stayed there, I think she'd be a good teacher and she cared about her. Still, Annie did not give up. Little by little, Helen learned to trust her new teacher. Annie began to teach Helen about words. She spelled words using her fingers. Her hand formed a different shape for each letter. She pressed each shape into Helen's hand. When she gave Helen some cake, she spelled C-A-K-E into Helen's palm. When Helen held her doll, Annie spelled D-O-L-L for Helen. Helen imitated the shapes. She thought it was a game. She didn't know that the shapes spelled words. After a month, Helen could spell whatever Annie spelled. But Helen still did not know that she was naming the things that she touched. And right here she is, Annie finger spelling into Helen's hand. One day, Helen and Annie walked into the well house. Someone was pumping water. Annie pushed Helen's hand into the rushing water. Helen felt the cool water on one hand, and she felt her teacher's fingers spelling W-A-T-E-R on her other hand. Over and over, Annie spelled the word. Suddenly, Helen stood very still. All at once, she understood. It was ding! A light bulb went off in her head, I think. The liquid flowing over her hand had a name. It was W-A-T-E-R, and we know that to be what? Water. Everything had a name. Helen wanted to learn them all. She ran from one thing to another, and Annie spelled the name of everything Helen touched. Then Helen turned and pointed to Annie. T-E-A-C-H-E-R, spelled Annie, teacher. From then on, Helen's name for Annie was teacher. That summer, Helen learned a lot of new words. She stopped using her old motions. Her fingers gave her all the words she needed. So do you think she's going to behave as badly now that she knows how to communicate what she wants? Yes. Whenever any of us like if we're stressed or we're sad. I mean, talk to your teachers about it. Don't kind of let your behavior get bad because of it. Let your teachers kind of help you out. And I think she's learning to let her teacher help her out, and her behavior's not going to be so bad because she can communicate. Annie did not teach Helen words one at a time. She talked to her in full sentences. That way, Helen learned more than just a few words. She learned new ideas. Helen and Annie took long walks through the woods and along the river. Annie gave Helen lessons on the walks. She showed Helen how seeds sprout and plants grow. She made mountains out of mud and taught Helen about volcanoes. Sometimes they climbed a tree and had a lesson there. And there's Helen and Annie having a lesson. Reading a book in Braille. Helen was hungry for knowledge. She wanted to learn everything Annie could teach her. And soon Annie started teaching Helen how to read. The words were printed in raised letters for a blind person. Helen felt the words with her fingers. She liked to hunt for the words she knew. And when she learned to read better, she read her books over and over. Her curious fingers wore down the raised letters. So what does that mean when it says she was hungry for knowledge? Because we think of hungry as something with food. But that means you really, really want it if you're hungry for food. So if she's hungry for knowledge, that means she really, really wants knowledge and she wants to learn. Now that she understands, she wants to learn as much as she can. Helen also learned to write. She wrote many letters to her family and Dr. Bell. She wrote letters to Mr. Anagnos in Boston. Mr. Anagnos was amazed by how much Helen had learned. He published some of Helen's letters. Reporters began to write about Helen. Soon she was famous, and people all over the world wanted to know about the miracle girl. And Helen wanted to know all about the world. Isn't that a great story? I just love a story about a hero. See you soon. Bye.